Okay, are you ready? Today we're going to do a deep dive into something pretty wild. We're going to talk about ego death.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, have you ever heard of this?
Oh, absolutely.
People who take psychedelics talk about this feeling. It's like your sense of self completely dissolves.
Right.
And you become one with everything.
That's it, yeah. It's a very profound experience.
It's a profound experience. So the question we're going to try to grapple with is this just a hallucination? Or is there something more to it?
I think that's the big question
Yeah.
that everyone's trying to figure out.
Absolutely.
Is this really just a trick of the brain?
Right.
Or is there something more profound going on?
Is it actually real? Yeah. Man, are we just, is our sense of self an illusion anyway?
Yeah. I mean, that's a fundamental question. This is really getting at that age-old question of who are we? What is the self? Where does that sense of self come from? And if it can dissolve like that, what does that tell us about its nature in the first place?
Absolutely. So today, to kind of explore this, we're going to be looking at different psychedelics, how they affect this sense of self. Substances like LSD, psilocybin magic mushrooms, and then we're going to get to 5-MeO-DMT, which is sometimes called toad venom.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a powerful one.
Yeah, it's supposed to be pretty intense. So we're going to look at how these substances kind of lead to this expanded state of consciousness, what people report. We've got a stack of sources. We've got Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind.
Great book.
Daniel Pinchbeck, Breaking Open the Head.
Classic.
And then, of course, we're going to dive into some research articles, the real nitty-gritty neuroscience of these experiences.
Right.
So I'm really excited. This is a topic that I've been interested in for a while. And I think it's really important to be clear, we're approaching this from a scientific lens. We're not advocating for the use of psychedelics.
Definitely not.
We're just looking at what the science says.
Exactly. Sticking to the research.
What are the reported experiences? What has the research been done? And trying to understand what's actually happening.
And I think it's worth reminding everyone, too, that, psychedelics are powerful substances.
Yes.
And they're not for everyone.
Absolutely.
It can be very challenging.
Set and setting.
Absolutely.
All that is so important.
Yes.
But for now, let's just stick to the science and try to learn about this fascinating phenomenon.
All right.
So where should we start? I think LSD has got a pretty wild origin story.
Oh, it does.
So maybe let's start there.
Okay. So LSD was discovered completely by accident in 1943.
I love that it was discovered by accident.
By a Swiss chemist named Albert Hofmann. And he was actually researching ergot fungus when he, accidentally ingested a tiny amount.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't even know what he was taking.
No, not at first. I mean, he experienced some weird, strange sensations. He went home and he ended up having what we now know as the first intentional LSD trip. But it was, it came from an accidental dose.
So how did he know to take it again intentionally? Was he like, what, that was weird, I want more of that? Or what was the train of thought?
I think he suspected that whatever he had experienced was somehow related to the LSD compound that he was working with. And so he decided to kind of test it in a more controlled setting. And he took what he thought was a very small dose, 250 micrograms. But even that turned out to be a pretty potent dose.
Yeah, they say a little goes a long way.
The little goes a long way with LSD, for sure.
That's incredible. I mean, it's one of those potent psychoactive substances out there.
Yeah.
And it's active in such tiny doses.
Yeah. And I think that potency is definitely part of what made it so fascinating. And also a little bit scary.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you don't want to mess around with stuff like that.
No.
So LSD, potent, scary, fascinating. And then we have, you can't talk about LSD without talking about Aldous Huxley.
Aldous Huxley, yeah.
The Doors of Perception.
Right.
But it's interesting because he actually took mescaline, right? Not LSD.
Yeah, he did. But his book, The Doors of Perception, it's kind of a classic account of a psychedelic experience. Yeah. Even though it wasn't specifically LSD. And his writing was so influential in shaping the way that people think about these experiences.
Yeah.
He really presented it as a way to kind of access this hidden reality, this world that's normally blocked by our everyday awareness.
So, it's interesting because, the question is, if our brains are always filtering reality anyway, how do we know that what we're experiencing on psychedelics is any more real than our normal experience?
That is the million-dollar question, right? I mean, how do we know what's real? Right.
And psychedelics seem to really blur those lines.
Is it just signal versus noise? Like, are we just getting more noise?
Yeah, that's the challenge, right? It's like, how do you separate the insights
and the hallucinations,
the genuine, glimpses of something deeper, from just the kind of randomness of the brain, firing in different ways.
Oh, man. Maybe our normal perception is just a controlled hallucination.
Well, that's actually kind of a line of thinking in neuroscience.
Yeah.
That our brains are constantly constructing our reality based on, expectations, past experiences, sensory data.
Yeah.
And so, in a way, our everyday consciousness is a kind of controlled hallucination.
That's pretty wild.
It is, yeah.
So maybe psychedelics are just lifting the veil on that.
Yeah, maybe.
So then there was a period, the 50s and 60s, where there was a lot of scientific research happening. Oh yeah, a huge surge.
Psychedelics.
Thousands of people were participating in studies.
Thousands of people.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was really a period of intense interest and optimism about what these substances could do.
Right, because that was the time when people were starting to look at these substances as potentially therapeutic.
Yeah, there was a lot of excitement about their potential to treat mental health conditions, enhance creativity, maybe even promote personal growth. And there was this one figure who is very central to all of this.
Okay.
Al Hubbard.
Al Hubbard, who's that?
Well, he was kind of an enigma. He had ties to both the government and the counterculture. And he supplied LSD to many researchers.
Wow.
There's even speculation that he had connections to the CIA. So it's a very mysterious and kind of an intriguing story.
Oh man, that sounds like a whole other deep dive right there.
Oh yeah, he definitely deserves his own episode. Yeah.
I love it, a man of mystery. All right, well, so Al Hubbard's out there. He's providing LSD to researchers. What were they finding? What were they doing with this?
Well, there's actually this fascinating theory that the LSD that he was distributing may have played a role in the very birth of Silicon Valley.
Wait a minute, LSD in Silicon Valley? Now that's a connection I never would have guessed. What do you mean?
Well, a lot of those early tech pioneers, people like Stuart Brand, they experimented with LSD.
Right.
Often through Hubbard. And some people believe that those experiences had a pretty profound impact on their thinking, on their innovations.
I'm just imagining Steve Jobs, taking some LSD and then having a eureka moment about the first Apple computer.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a bit of a stretch, but it's interesting.
It is an interesting idea.
Yeah. It's really interesting to think about, like, altered states of consciousness and how they might contribute to breakthroughs in different fields.
Definitely. And beyond just Silicon Valley, there were some really fascinating research projects going on at the time, like the Good Friday experiment.
Tell me about the Good Friday experiment. What was that?
So this was in 1962 at Harvard, and this researcher, Walter Pahnke, he was at Harvard Divinity School. He gave psilocybin to a group of divinity students at the Marsh Chapel. It was on Good Friday, and he wanted to see if psilocybin could reliably occasion mystical experiences.
Wow.
And the results were pretty striking.
Really?
Yeah. The majority of the students reported having profound spiritual experiences.
So they were having these experiences in a very religious setting.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting.
It is. It really kind of raises questions about this intersection of psychedelics and spirituality.
Yeah, it's a very interesting and complex topic.
It is, yeah. Some people believe that psychedelics offer a path to genuine, spiritual insights.
Right.
Other people kind of view it as more of a mimicking of religious experiences.
Right.
So it's definitely a complex relationship there.
And then, of course, how could we forget Timothy Leary?
Oh, yeah.
Right. Who, he was a researcher at Harvard, but he became kind of a very controversial advocate for LSD.
He did, yeah.
He's the one who came up with the phrase, turn on, tune in, drop out.
That's right, yeah.
So, it's interesting because, he contributed to the public's interest in psychedelics, but then his outspokenness and kind of his unconventional approaches also fueled the moral panic that led to these substances being criminalized.
Yeah. And so, all of that research that was going on in the 50s and 60s, it pretty much got shut down.
Yeah. It went underground.
And it's only been in recent decades that we've seen this kind of resurgence of serious research.
Right. Happening again.
Right. So it's like we had this period of exploration.
Yeah.
And then it just got shut down.
It did, yeah.
And it's been a long time coming to kind of pick that back up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we've kind of talked about the history, the cultural impact, the different figures who have shaped, kind of our understanding of these substances.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm really interested in the neuroscience, like what's actually happening in the brain.
Yeah.
When someone has an experience of ego death.
Right.
What is going on?
Yeah. Let's get into the brain.
Let's get into it.
Yeah.
That's what I'm really excited to dive into today. I mean, it feels like we're finally starting to get a glimpse into what's actually happening.
We are.
Thanks to all the advances in brain imaging and the research that's happening. So, let's jump into that.
Okay. Let's do it.
Yeah.
So where were we? Yes. We were about to explore the neuroscience of ego death. All right, let's get into the brain and try to understand, like, what's actually happening, when someone is having this experience.
Yeah. One of the most interesting areas of research in this area focuses on the default mode network.
The default mode network.
Yeah, or the DMN. You can think of it kind of as like the conductor of the brain's orchestra.
Conductor.
Yeah. So it's involved in self-reflection, mental time travel, theory of mind, all the things that kind of that make us.
So if the DMN is the conductor, then what happens to the orchestra when someone takes a psychedelic?
Right.
And experiences ego death? Like, does the music just stop?
Well, it's not that the music stops, but it definitely changes.
Okay.
Yeah. So research has shown that the DMN is actually suppressed during psychedelic experiences, especially during, really intense ego dissolution.
Okay.
So it's like the conductor steps down.
Right.
And the musicians start improvising. You get this whole new kind of music.
Interesting. So instead of having, like, this usual coordinated activity, the brain's kind of doing something different.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like the brain is kind of freed up from those usual constraints.
And so, I mean, how does that translate into someone's experience then?
Well, one theory is that psychedelics don't just turn off the DMN, but they actually allow a more kind of primitive, less filtered mode of consciousness to emerge.
Primitive.
Yeah, it's like tapping into this really primal part of our brains that's usually kind of hidden beneath our everyday awareness.
Okay, so it's like peeling back the layers of our modern analytical minds.
Yeah.
To reveal something more fundamental.
Right, exactly.
More interconnected way of experiencing the world.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. And this connects to another really fascinating concept called predictive coding.
Predictive coding.
Oh, okay. Have you heard of this?
I've heard of it, but, explain it to me.
Okay. So the basic idea is that our brains are constantly trying to make sense of the world.
Right.
By making predictions.
Okay.
Based on, past experiences and incoming sensory data.
Okay.
So in a way, our everyday consciousness is kind of a controlled hallucination.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Are you saying that our normal perception of reality is a construction?
Well, yeah, in a way, yeah.
Right.
I mean, think of it like your brain is a detective.
Right.
Trying to solve a mystery.
Right.
Right. And it's using, all of its past experiences and these clues from the senses to kind of make a best guess about what's happening.
Right.
But psychedelics, what they can do is they can kind of disrupt this process.
Right.
They force the brain to kind of question its assumptions and see things from a fresh perspective.
Okay.
So it's like shaking up the snow globe.
Let's see it, get up.
Yeah. And seeing that reality is maybe more fluid,
right,
less fixed than we usually think.
So it's like we have this idea of what reality is, but then psychedelics come in and they're like, no.
Yeah.
It could be this, or it could be this, or it could be something else entirely.
Right. They kind of open up the possibilities.
Yeah.
And that can be, very, very profound for people.
Right. Because if you're shaking up the very foundations of how you see yourself, and the world, then that's bound to lead to some pretty big shifts in perspective.
Definitely.
But the question is, do these changes last? Like, does ego death actually lead to lasting transformation?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And there's some really compelling stories of people who have gone through these profound personal transformations through psychedelic experiences. Like, for example, there's this guy named Patrick Met.
Okay.
He was a participant in the NYU psilocybin study, and he had terminal cancer. And he went through a really complete ego dissolution during his psilocybin session.
But what happened?
Well, he came out of it with this completely new perspective on death.
Okay.
He described it as this feeling of like returning to the source.
Wow.
Of becoming one with everything. And that shift allowed him to kind of live out his final days with this really profound peace and acceptance.
Wow. So to go from fearing death to embracing it.
Yeah.
Like that's incredible.
It is, yeah. And it's a really powerful testament to, to the potential of psychedelics to really help people alleviate end-of-life anxiety.
Yeah.
To help people really face death with less fear.
Wow. So that's one story. Is there research that backs this up, or is it just, anecdotal evidence?
Well, researchers actually use this tool called the Mystical Experience Questionnaire, or the MEQ, to kind of measure these qualities that are often associated with ego death.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So they're actually trying to quantify the mystical experience.
Yeah, they are. They're trying to understand, what are the common elements?
Right.
The sense of unity, the transcendence of time and space, the feeling of sacredness, those kinds of things.
Wow, that's fascinating. So they're trying to find ways to actually study these experiences in a more rigorous way.
They are, yeah. And, another really powerful example is Michael Pollan's own psychedelic journey.
Oh, wait.
In his book, How to Change Your Mind, he talks about smoking toad venom and having this complete ego death experience.
Right.
He described it as like dissolving into a cloud of molecules.
Dissolving into molecules. Man, I can only imagine what that must felt like.
Yeah. It's hard to even put into words.
Yeah.
But these experiences can be incredibly profound.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that the integration process is really crucial.
Integration.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you're saying like just having the experience isn't enough.
No.
It's about what you do with it afterwards.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just about taking a drug and going on a trip. It's about using these experiences as catalyst for real personal growth and healing.
Right. So having like a skilled therapist or guide.
Yeah, absolutely.
Could really be a key part of that.
Yeah. It's not something to be done lightly.
Right.
These are powerful experiences and they can be really, really beneficial.
Yeah.
But it's important to do it in the right way.
Right. I mean, so this is kind of what's exciting about the current wave of psychedelic research.
Yeah.
Is that it's going beyond just documenting these experiences.
Right.
But actually looking at how we can use them to help people.
Exactly. And that's what's really I think that's what's really giving people hope that these substances that have been, demonized for so long.
Right.
Actually have the potential to really, help people who are suffering.
Right. So we've talked about psychedelics dissolving the ego, creating this expanded sense of connection.
Yeah.
But if those things are possible, I mean, are there other ways to access those states of consciousness?
That's a great question.
Without drugs?
Yeah, and the answer is yes.
Okay.
There are, a lot of contemplative practices like meditation have been shown to actually produce very similar effects on the brain.
Interesting. So you're saying that like it's possible to quiet the DMN.
Yeah.
Through practices like mindfulness.
Exactly. Yeah, meditation, other contemplative practices.
Right.
They've been shown to reduce activity in the DMN and to cultivate this sense of presence.
Right.
Of interconnectedness.
Okay.
And even, ego transcendence.
Okay. So I mean, it sounds like there's multiple paths to these transformative experiences. But even with things like meditation, it takes time, dedication, discipline.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's not easy.
Right.
Whether you're using psychedelics or whether you're engaging in contemplative practices.
Right.
Cultivating these states of consciousness, it takes effort.
Effort.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it sounds like the rewards are pretty enormous.
It can be. Yeah.
Okay, so that's really encouraging to hear.
Yeah.
That there's different ways to explore these states.
Yeah.
And it seems like there's a growing awareness of the potential benefits, for well-being.
Yeah.
Even for people who aren't, struggling with mental illness.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a whole kind of growing movement of people who are exploring how these psychedelics and contemplative practices can, enhance creativity, foster personal growth, help us connect more deeply with ourselves and with the world around us.
Yeah. Well, I'm really excited to see where all of this leads.
Me too.
But I think, for this part of the deep dive, let's maybe shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
And explore how psychedelics are actually being used in therapeutic settings.
Yeah.
Like, what are some of the specific mental health conditions that are being studied?
Yeah, let's get into that.
Let's get into it. But before we do, we've been talking about how psychedelics can dissolve the ego. They can expand our sense of connection.
Right.
But what does that really mean for our understanding of mental health and well-being?
Yeah.
If the sense of self can be so fluid and malleable, what does that tell us about how we treat mental illness?
That's a big question.
That's a big question. So think about that.
Yeah.
We'll come back to it. Okay, so you left us with a pretty big question to think about. If our sense of self is so fluid, what does that mean for how we understand, mental illness and how we treat it? But, I think for now, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the therapeutic applications of psychedelics.
Okay, yeah, let's do that.
What are some of the conditions that are being studied?
Well, it's really a fascinating time for psychedelic research because we're seeing this resurgence of interest after, decades of these substances being basically off limits.
Right.
And now they're being studied for their potential to treat, a whole range of mental health conditions.
Yeah. I mean, one area that I've been reading a lot about is addiction.
Oh, yeah.
Like using psychedelics to treat addiction.
Addiction, yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah.
There's a growing body of evidence suggesting that psychedelics, particularly psilocybin, can help people overcome addiction to things like alcohol, nicotine.
It makes sense, given what we were talking about earlier, like how psychedelics can kind of disrupt those ingrained patterns of thinking and behavior.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, addiction is often rooted in those really deep-seated, patterns and cravings.
Right.
And psychedelics can kind of help break those up.
Okay, yeah.
Create an opportunity for real change.
So it's like hitting the reset button.
Yeah.
On the brain, allowing people to kind of step back and reevaluate their relationship with whatever the addictive substance is.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Okay, cool. So addiction, what about, we've talked about addiction. What about depression?
Depression, yeah.
I mean, that's a huge,
Huge.
affects so many people.
Millions of people.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's some really promising research on using psychedelics, again, particularly psilocybin,
Okay.
To treat depression.
I've even heard about studies using psychedelics to treat what they call treatment-resistant depression. Like people who, traditional antidepressants just haven't worked for.
That's right, yeah.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, there have been some really impressive clinical trials showing that psilocybin, combined with psychotherapy, can have a really significant and lasting impact on people with treatment-resistant depression.
It seems like, these substances are working on a different level than traditional antidepressants.
Yeah.
Which, they often focus on adjusting neurotransmitter levels.
Right.
But it seems like psychedelics are doing something else.
Yeah, they seem to be working by promoting neuroplasticity.
Neuroplasticity, okay.
Yeah, so the brain's ability to change and adapt.
Okay.
And they can help break down those rigid thought patterns.
Okay.
That are often associated with depression and help form, new neural pathways.
So they're essentially rewiring the brain.
In a way, yeah.
Wow. Okay, so addiction, depression. What about end-of-life anxiety?
End-of-life anxiety.
I've heard, about using psychedelics to help people cope with dying.
Yeah, absolutely. This is an area of research that was actually explored way back in the first wave of psychedelic research,
right,
in the 50s and 60s.
Okay.
And studies from that time showed that LSD and psilocybin could help terminally ill patients come to terms with their mortality and experience greater peace and acceptance.
So even in the face of death,
yeah,
these substances can help people connect with meaning and find some sense of peace.
Yeah, it's really quite remarkable.
It makes you wonder if the experience of ego death, like that dissolution of self, if that somehow helps people tap into a broader perspective, something beyond their individual fears.
Yeah. By dissolving the ego, psychedelics might help people connect with something larger than themselves. Yeah. Whether it's, sense of spirituality,
right,
a connection to nature, or just a deeper appreciation for life itself.
Yeah, it seems like those are themes that come up again and again.
They do.
When people talk about their psychedelic experiences.
Unity,
connection,
transcendence. Yeah. And it kind of circles back to your question earlier about whether there are other ways to access these states,
right,
without drugs,
right,
and the answer is yes. There are practices like meditation, mindfulness, even just spending time in nature,
right,
have been shown to have similar effects on the brain.
So we can learn from both the scientific research on psychedelics, but also from these ancient wisdom traditions.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like meditation.
Yeah.
They both kind of offer these valuable insights into the nature of consciousness and the potential for human transformation.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. It's not either.
Right.
It's both hand.
Yeah. Man, this has been an incredible deep dive.
It has.
We've gone from the history of psychedelics to the neuroscience of ego death to the potential therapeutic benefits. We even touched upon some pretty profound philosophical questions about the nature of self and reality.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
It is. But I think, one thing is clear. We're only just beginning to understand the full potential of these powerful tools.
I think that's right.
And as research continues, I think we need to proceed with caution, responsibility, and a lot of respect for the power of these substances.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's crucial to approach these substances with a clear understanding of both the risks and the benefits.
Right.
And to make sure that they're used in safe and supportive settings.
Absolutely. Well said. So, to our listener, as we wrap up this episode, we want to leave you with this question. If psychedelics can temporarily dissolve the ego and expand our sense of connection, can we cultivate these qualities in our everyday lives, even without drugs?
That's a good question.
Can we find ways to live with more presence, more compassion, more wonder, no matter what our circumstances are? Something to think about.
I think that's a great question to leave people with.
Yeah. All right, well, until next time.
Take care.